Hello, once again, this is Miss Goodwin. Today we are going over Objective 4.2.3, the last of 3 lessons in Objective 4.2. We are going to be using trigonometry to find angles in our right triangles now. So the objective is that you can use the arc sine, arc cosine, and arc tangent functions to find the missing angles of a right triangle. What you hopefully remember by now is that sine of x equals the opposite over the hypotenuse, cosine of x is the adjacent over the hypotenuse, and tangent of x equals the opposite over the adjacent. All three of these are ratios that can be used to figure out the different parts of a right triangle. Now, sine, cosine, and tangent are functions of the angle. So in order to get that angle, we can't just divide out sine. We can't divide out cosine. We have to use a special function known as the inverse function. So an example of an inverse function that you might be familiar with is adding and subtracting. Subtracting undoes the addition and vice versa. So we call these inverse functions arc sine, arc cosine, and arc tangent. And what you do to one side, you have to do to the other. So if we want to figure out the angle, we have to take the arc trig function, the inverse trig function of our ratios. Now, all of our calculators use a slightly different notation. The sine, arc cosine, arc tangent can be written as their corresponding function to the -1 power. So like in this case, arc sine is equal to sine to the -1. That is another way it can be written. So as you can see here, depending on what sides you're given, we'll still use the same SOHCAHTOA mnemonic to help us out. And we take the sine inverse of opposite over hypotenuse if we're given the opposite and hypotenuse sides. If we're given adjacent and hypotenuse, we're going to take the cosine inverse. And I wrote tangent instead of adjacent there. So if we have our opposite and adjacent side, we are going to be taking the inverse tangent of that. So let's look at an example. All right, here. So we want to know what is angle X. So our first step would be to figure out what info do we have. And to do that, we need to label our sides. So again, hypotenuse is the longest side, the side next to our angle is adjacent, and the side across from our angle is the opposite. So we have our hypotenuse and our opposite. So now that we know we are given our info of opposite and hypotenuse, we need to pick trig function. Pick the trig function. Opposite and hypotenuse corresponds with sine. So we are going to use this function a little up here. X equals the sine inverse of opposite over hypotenuse. Like so. So now that we know which function we're using, we are just going to be plugging in our values. So x equals sine inverse. Our opposite side is here, 2.5. And our hypotenuse is 5. So we know x equals the sine inverse of 2.5 over 5, which we can just use a calculator for. Our best friends in math. So to plug this into the Desmos calculator, the physical calculators use the exact same process. We're going to do functions, and we want sine inverse. Then we do our numerator, which is 2.5, and divide that by 5. And we get 30 degrees. Make sure your calculator is in degrees mode. That is important, otherwise you won't get the right answer. You won't get the answer in the form we want. So we know our angle is 30 degrees. And that is all you have to do. Let's look at another example. Let's write our little mnemonics. SOHCAHTOA. And we want to figure out what angle x is. I'm going to start by labeling my sides. This is my hypotenuse, adjacent and opposite. I see we have our opposite and our adjacent. So that tells me we are using tangent. So from this point, I set up our function. X equals the inverse tangent of opposite over adjacent. Plug in our numbers. And then we move to our calculator again. Tangent inverse of 300 divided by 400. Close parentheses. We get 36.8, which rounds up to 37. And that is all you have to do. So I'll go ahead and let you go now. If you have any more questions, feel free to contact me in class or through email or Canvas. And go ahead and get started on the playlist now. And I'll see you next time. Have a wonderful day. Bye.